Why is it that others seem to find it easier to do meaningful things, yet the rest of us struggle to keep a single promise to ourselves, leaving us to ask the question of what's wrong with me, why can't I concentrate, and why do I feel so burnt out after 30 minutes into this task? Only for entrepreneurs to simply say, work harder and push through the pain. So, firstly, I don't want to believe that everyone is just inherently lazy. Sure, I think people, can like to be lazy and not have to work all the time, but I don't think that everyone who hasn't, for example, made a name for themselves or done something with their life is just simply lazy. I think a lot of it can come down to your dopamine, down to just simply your brain and what's just going on in your body. And I want to use this video to share a bit more about my experience and what that's looked like. So the first thing I think is we got dopamine. And dopamine being the sort of motivation and drive towards doing things, from what I understand. And I had huge struggles with this and still do from time to time, where overstimulation and high dopamine spikes cause a lot of issues when trying to do meaningful things, when trying to focus and trying to push through the more difficulties in whatever work you're focusing on. So for me, when I would be playing hours and hours of video games and I'd be binging loads of content, this became a huge problem. Because what was happening is that I'd be giving myself high dopamine spikes, but then very quick drops as well. Meaning that because my brain was seeing those high dopamine spikes, it just wanted more of them, even if the drop was very immediate, which is why things like video games, things like perhaps binging content, there's lots of novelty, there's lots of reward and such from that with very little effort. What did this mean? It meant that I was training my brain to seek out reward with little to no effort at all, meaning that everyday things in life, meaning that the work which perhaps was interesting to me or the work which I usually did became much harder. It became boring. It just became like a chore. And that was really worrying. So that was one of the things. And I realized that, right, well, if I keep training my brain to act this way, then that's not going to help. And initially, right, before I really went even into much research with dopamine, I didn't really know what was going on. I just assumed that I was broken in some sort of way or shape or form. And when I saw all these other people online just telling me to work harder and to, just push through it and such, it just made me feel like I was an outlier, whether there was something wrong with me or perhaps there were just a few percent of people that were just inherently good and just knew exactly what to do and just didn't really have as much of a problem as other people. But as much as I then delved into it further, I realized that wasn't really the case. I realized that a lot of it, like I said, was dopamine. It was that stimulation, it was that dopamine baseline, which really caused quite a lot. The second thing I realized I was having an issue with was what I was putting into my body. And what I've noticed now is most of the foods and drinks on the shelves in shops today are what I would call science experiments, where if you look at the ingredients, you'll realize that most of the ingredients in there you either don't know or at least simply don't need to be in there. Like there's some bread in shops or other things where you think, there should only be 2 or 3 or at least a handful of ingredients in there, only to see that there's at least 15 to 20 ingredients in there that are just causing loads of stuff in. Now, originally speaking, I wasn't too skeptical about this. And for the longest time, I just thought, right, well, if it looks good and other people are buying it, then it's probably okay. Or at least it's not going to be that bad. But it's the things such as the seed oils, the additives, the preservatives, and all the other other smaller things which you don't really realize is having an effect on you, that over a long period of time and over just constantly consuming it can almost start to just drain your energy, drain your focus, drain your just ability to really turn up every day the way you want to. And I knew this that when I was bulking, when I was bulking quite a few years ago, and I wasn't on the diet I was now, I was having pretty high protein in terms of chicken and whatever, but I was having tons of rice, tons of pasta, tons of spaghetti, you name it. Now, honestly speaking, I could have been having a lot more processed stuff, right? Don't get me wrong. I was having lots of bread though, which was quite an issue. And what ended up happening is that, sure, although I did bulk quite a bit, I felt horrible. And I've done a video on this, but I felt really, really bad for a number of reasons, right? I had lots of bloating and I had tons of brain fog, meaning whenever I would try and sit down to work on something meaningful to me, I just could not. I genuinely could not, because I was just sat there like, look, I can't even do anything at the moment. Meaning that when I felt just so rubbish, I didn't have the energy, mental clarity, there was even more reinforcement to go and play the video games or to go and do whatever else it was, because that was easier, right? And so you can see here that I just realized, looking back, I was setting myself up for failure. I really was, because combining both the two, I realized, right, well, there's no kidding that people can't get stuff done. And I mean, I was never a guy who was into alcohol or drugs ever, never did any of them. And I still haven't done any of them. But looking back now, I just think, how can a lot of people go through their lives or try and focus on things when they've got all of these things out of place, when their dopamine is dysregulated, when the things they're consuming might as well be science experiments, and they're just giving their body all the wrong things, right? Their brain is completely off, and their body is just dysregulated, their nervous system, you name it. So really, I just want this video to be more of something which just at least gets you asking a few questions. Because, for example, if you've been feeling that you can't focus on things as well as you can, or if you feel that you've been getting bloating, or that you just haven't been able to focus on things, then that's something to consider. Now, the one thing I will say is, in terms of the things I'm eating and consuming now, it's pretty much just animal based. So this is meat, eggs, fruit, raw honey, animal products. That's pretty much it, right? I don't have any bread. I don't have any other processed foods, right? Or at least majority speaking. On the very rare occasion I might go out with family or such, or like, that's obviously very rare. But generally speaking, it's foods that are either single or just couple ingredient stuff. And since then, I've had so much mental clarity. I don't get brain fog anymore, or rarely, and I don't get bloating anymore. And it's just stuff like that which I've just seen such a shift in, and realizing, right, well, I need to be really conscious of the stuff I'm eating, where now it is pretty much, I've got low to mid carbs, which usually comes from fruit and honey. I've got high protein and high fats, and that's just what works for me. And what I'd recommend for you to do, whether you're struggling more so with just dopamine and that being dysregulated, or perhaps with the stuff you're consuming, is just pick one thing to focus on and play around with it, experiment with it a bit. And what I noticed is that when I went on that animal-based diet, when I started introducing foods back, such as bread or whatever it was, I realized, oh, actually, no, that wasn't a good idea. Or like, I know some vegetables, which I don't eat any vegetables, I just have fruit, but I noticed some vegetables that I would have, my gut reacted a bit bad to. And so like, all of a sudden I realized, that issue was actually this food, or it was this thing I was drinking. But the point being is that if you can focus on improving those two things, where you can help that dopamine baseline get to a healthier level, but you can also just focus more consciously on the stuff you're consuming as well, then I think that's going to make a huge difference. And again, like I said before, I don't think people are broken. I don't think, our brains are broken. I don't think we're just fully inherently lazy. I think a lot of it can actually come from the stuff we are consuming, both physically and digitally. So let me know your thoughts on this, or on things that you're struggling more so on. If you want me to do a video diving a bit more deeper into one of these, do let me know. But with that said, take care.